Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season wins total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth. Coming up in this episode, we will be examining the BYU Cougars. BYU finished with a 10-2 record and 7-2 in the Big 12. Head coach Kalani Sitake in his 9th season had a bounce-back season after going 5-7 in 2023.
And let's pick up right where Tina left off, folks, with the BYU Cougars. This team did go 10-2 in the regular season. And when we look at, from a betting standpoint, how this team did, their season win total back in June, folks, light was their projection. This team absolutely exceeded all expectations by beating that 4.5 season win total that was set by our friends in the desert. This team absolutely blew past that by almost doubling that projection. So Vegas was not really on par with where the BYU Cougars wound up on the season. So good bounce back year for head coach Kalani Sitake there. Now, as far as the in-season projections, which we do about as good as anybody in this business, when we look at our composite win total for BYU, once we got into the season, we had this team with a projected win total of 9 wins. So they still exceeded that by 1 game. We'll talk about the 1 game that really made the difference for them here in just a moment. But no matter how we how we carve it up, this team was quite impressive with what we saw from them this past year. Now, as we always like to look at the strength of schedule versus the strength of record. Your strength of schedule is what you can control for the most part. Takes a look at how tough was your non-conference schedule, and then how tough was your in-conference schedule. Now, your strength of record, a little bit different. That is how well did your opponents do in the 2024 season. Let's take a look at the numbers here. As far as their strength of schedule at a 43.8%, 51st toughest schedule in the FBS last year. We know that there's 68 Power 4 teams when you include Notre Dame with the Big Four conferences. So towards the back end of that, but still very strong schedule. Now, as far as their strength of record, now that took a significant dip. Opponent win percentage of 49.2%, 99th best in the FBS. So when you look at how well or how poorly their opponents did, not nearly as strong as some other teams in this conference. Key takeaway, BYU overperformed their expected win total, largely due to a strong defensive showing and effective offensive efficiency. Yes, indeed, that is a mouthful. All right, let's get into the breakdown here. As we are going to always do on this podcast, let's take a look at the offense. And if you're joining us on YouTube or listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, I want to say thank you for joining us. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at how was the quality of defenses that BYU's offense faced last year. And we used the number 68 because that's how many Power 4 teams there are in Division I. So we're just going to look at how many teams were at least at that 68 or better as far as their defensive numbers go. All right, so SMU was 34th. Kansas State was 25th. BYU was 49th. Central Florida was 61st. Utah was 12th. Kansas was 41st. Arizona State was 24th, and Houston was 26th. So 8 out of their 12 opponents, their defense from a scoring standpoint was among the top 68 in college football last year. So they faced some really solid defenses. Now, when we look at their opponents' records, they faced, let's see, and we're looking at teams in the regular season that went at least 6-6 or better. They beat teams like SMU, Kansas State, BYU, lost to Arizona State. So 3-1 when you start looking at some of the better competition. We'll talk about some of the slip-ups, but I said that one game that really kind of tilted the win-loss parameter, you have to look no further than the game back early on in the season against SMU when they won that game 18-15. That game was the difference as far as our projections go. Now, let's talk about the offense here. If I would sum up this BYU offense, I would say it was efficient but lacked explosiveness. Now, I'll get into that here in just a moment. This team averaged 30.8 points per game, a couple of points better than the NCAA average. When I look at their total offense, about 397 yards, it looks like, per game, and their yards per play was 6.4. Let's talk about the strengths of this offense. Effective rushing attack. When we adjust yards per game, we'll get into that a little bit here in a moment. They were absolutely phenomenal. This team, from an offensive line standpoint, did a tremendous job. Only 14 sacks allowed during the regular season. This team was solid on third down. Now, where they struggled on offense, really struggled to create explosive plays. Get into that here in just a moment. Passing game lacked consistency. We'll talk about that as well, and kind of below average when we talked about converting inside the scoring zone there. All right, let's jump into it here. Their offense, as I mentioned, 30.8 points per game, just about almost 3 points better than the NCAA average there. So about 2.8 points per game better than that. But when we adjust for opponent, that number ticks down just a little bit to 29.4. So about a 1.5 point difference there. Now, their passing game. Their raw data in the regular season, 238 yards, passing yards per game. That dips down to 225 when we adjust for opponents. So about a 13 yards difference there. Now, the rushing attack improved, went from 159.4 all the way up to 181.6. So the rushing yards, when we adjust for opponent, went up about 22 yards. Then overall, their total offense goes from 397 to about 406. So about a 9-yard per game improvement there on that data. As far as their scoring drives ending with a field goal or touchdown, this team in BYU ended their drives 51.5% of the time, either with a touchdown or a field goal. Now, drives ending with a touchdown, something that I pay very close attention to. 33.4% of their drives ended with a touchdown. The third down conversion rate, when we adjust for opponent, instead of the NCAA average of 39.1%, they were at about 38.7, so just a tick below the average there. Now, when I talk about the 3 E's, was your offense efficient? Was it explosive? And was it effective? Let's take a look at where they broke out in those categories. As far as their effectiveness, this team was 40th in college football last year, 134 teams, by the way. As far as being explosive, they were 39th. As far as being efficient, they were 30th. So this offense was our 36th overall rated offense. Now let's talk about their defense here. And if I had to sum up their defense, I would say was strong, but struggled on key downs back in 2024. Their points per game allowed about 20 points per game, about 4.3 yards per play, which was phenomenal. Passing defense and rush defense, all very solid. So let's take a look at their strengths. Strong passing defense, consistently forced third downs by their opponents, and then limit scoring opportunities is what we saw from this BYU defense. Now, some of the weaknesses. This team did not do a fantastic job of getting after the quarterback. Only 14 sacks, well below the average of 23 during the regular season. This team struggled defending fourth down conversions by their opponents. Their opponents attempted 32 fourth downs, converted 16 of them. And then, as I mentioned, inconsistent defensive pressure. Now, let's talk about the quality of offenses that this team faced last year. And when we look at, once again, using that top 68, how many offenses did they face that were above that threshold? Well, starting with SMU, our 10th best scoring offense last year. Kansas State, 29th. Baylor was 7th. Oklahoma State was 57th. UCF was 24th. Kansas was 23rd. And Arizona State was 28th. So 7 out of their 12 opponents had offenses that would have graded inside of where we look at the Power 4 threshold. So they faced some quality, their defense faced some quality offenses during the season last year. Now, let's take a look at the breakout between the metrics and how we adjust for opponents. As I mentioned, 20.1 points per game allowed. When we adjust for opponent, that actually improves to 17.9. So about 2 points per game better. Their pass defense goes from 180 yards per game down to 168 when we adjust for opponent. So an improvement of 12 yards per game. Same can be said about their rush defense. Goes from 137 yards per game to about 123. So about 14 yards improvement there. And their total yards per game goes from 317 down to 291. So about a 26 yard per game improvement when we adjust for opponents. Now, their opponents' drives ending with a score, either touchdown or field goal, 31% of the time. They got even stingier as far as once we get down in the red zone, as far as allowing their opponents to score touchdowns. Only 21% of their opponents' drive ended with a touchdown. Phenomenal job there. And now their third down conversion defense, as I mentioned, the NCAA average of 39%, they were right there at 38.9. So right about the average is what we saw this defense. Now, as I mentioned, the 3 E's for defense: effective, explosive, and efficient. As far as the defensive side of the ball, this is where this team really made their bones last year. As far as being effective on defense, 25th best out of 134 teams. As far as being explosive, defending opponents, as far as giving up big chunk plays, 16th best. And then as far as being efficient on defense, 23rd. This was the 20th best overall defense for us in college football last year. Now, let's take a look at the coaching situation and situational play. This team was 4-2 in one-score games. Conversely, they were, or I should say, in conjunction with that, all of their quality opponents, they played them in one-score games. So they were 4-2 against quality opponents. A +8 in the turnover differential. I'll get into that a little bit deeper here in a moment. And this team did not make a lot of mental mistakes. Only 4.9 penalties per game, to the tune of 42 penalty yards per game. That is well below what the average of 6 penalties per game, to the tune of about 53 yards. You're going to see some teams that are far worse than that. So great job there by head coach Kalani Sitake there. As far as how aggressive this coach was, about the middle of the pack, this team went for it on fourth downs to the tune of about 14.5%. That puts him about 60th out of 144 qualifying coaches last year. This team was absolutely special on fourth down. 15 conversions on 20 attempts, 75% there. So phenomenal job there. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper into the numbers here. When this team won and when they lost. So when this team won, they were scoring about 33 points per game, attempting about 29 pass attempts per game, or about 232 passing yards per game, 8 yards per attempt, 14.1 yards per completion. Now, they were also running the ball quite effectively. 36 rushing attempts per game, to the tune of 166 yards rushing per game, 4.6 yards per carry. Total offense, 397.5 yards per game, 6.1 yards per play. Now, when this team lost those 2 games in the regular season last year, this team only scored 18 points per game, was throwing the ball a little bit more as far as the attempts go, 33.5. Passing yards went up 269 yards per game, still 8 yards per pass attempt. Pass yards per completion went down to 13.1. But here's the big drop off. This team, when they lost, only 28.5 rushing attempts per game, only 128 yards per game on the ground, 4.5 yards per rushing attempt. The total yardage stayed about the same, but the yards per play improved to 6.4. So where's the great separator? In their wins last year, you're talking about in their 10 wins, they committed, looks like 14 turnovers. So a little over 1.4 turnovers per game. In their 2 losses, they had 4 turnovers. So they turned the ball over 2 times per game. So that increased quite a bit. Let's take a look at the difference here. When this team won, they were scoring about 15 more points per game. They were attempting about almost 5 less pass attempts per game. Attempting, as far as yardage go, about 37 yards less passing. But here's the difference. When they were winning, they were running the ball almost 38 yards per game better than when they lost. Now, let's take a look at the defense here. When this team won last year, their defense was allowing 19.6 points per game. Their opponents were averaging about 175 yards passing, only 5.4 yards per attempt, 10.1 yards per completion. Opponents were running the ball about 33 times per game to the tune of 141 yards per game, 4.3 yards per rushing attempt. And this team, when they won, they forced turnovers, 25 forced turnovers to the tune of 2.5 forced turnovers per game. Phenomenal. Now, on the other end of that stick, when they lost, this defense was giving up just 22.5 points per game. Passing yardage, they were giving up about 208, but the yards per passing attempt goes up from 5.4 to 9.5. The yards per completion goes from 10.1 to 14.9. Opponents were attempting about 38.5 rushing attempts per game for a total of 114 yards. 2.9 yards per rushing attempt when they lost. But here's the big difference. Remember the total turnovers I said when they won? They only forced 2 total turnovers in the games that they lost. So you're talking about going from 2.5 turnovers per game when they won on defense down to 1 turnover per game. So this team, when they were forcing turnovers, they were winning. Now the difference between when they lost and when they won. When they lost, they were only giving up 3 more points per game. They were giving up about 33 more passing yards per game, but the yards per attempt, when they lost, they were giving up almost 4 more yards per passing attempt. That is significant, especially when you're talking about the jump as far as how that broke out. That is definitely something noticeable there. Now, let's move on to the special teams, which I left out. Special teams, reliable kicking unit. They converted 19 of 21 kicks. For us, that looks like about 90, a little over 90% there. So fantastic job. This team also did a kind of below average job as far as average yard per punt, only 41.8 there. So what went wrong for BYU last year? The lack of defensive sack production definitely stands out. This team struggled as far as defending 4th downs. Their opponents went for it on 3rd down. Just looking at that number here. Okay, their opponents went for it 32 times, converted 16 of them. That's 50% there. So definitely struggled there. And then inconsistent passing attack on offense. Talked about the breakout as far as what they looked like when they won versus when they lost. It is very significant. They were throwing the ball more, and that's why they had more yards. But this team was absolutely needed to have a much more consistent passing offense. All right, let's get to the final grade as we go to the final verdict. The BYU Cougars will end the year with an A- grade. Their strength, strong defensive metrics, efficient rushing attack, and elite special teams. Weakness, as we mentioned, lack of sack, struggle defending fourth down, and passing game needs to be more consistent. What is that final verdict? BYU, a very well-rounded team, but inconsistencies in their passing game and lack of defensive sack production prevented them from taking the next step to elite status. What does this team need to fix in 2025? They must improve their defensive sack production. This team also must strengthen their passing game consistency and then finally defend the fourth down conversion better. If BYU improve in these areas, they can find themselves in the Big 12 title game and contending for a college football playoff berth in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at crunchtimesportsadvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.